Good afternoon. Oh, still morning. Welcome to the second annual Women's Fund Forum. We have a wonderful panel opportunity available for you, and we were so grateful that you've chosen to join us this morning. At this point, my name is Phyllis Hildreth. I'm the Academic Director for the Institute of Conflict Management, also a community board member of the Women's Fund, and co-chair of this event with Esty Harris in the back, who has been my partner in crime if we've moved forward with this event. At this point, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Nancy Magnuson Durham, Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives for Lipscomb University. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be the first of many, perhaps, who will welcome you to Lipscomb today. We're really pleased that you're on our campus, and we're very proud to be hosting this event with the Women's Fund. Thankful to our sponsors, First Tennessee and Verizon, and looking forward to this very significant conversation on pathology to promise. So if this is your first time on campus, how many are here for the first time? Any of you? All right, looks we got a few. Well, we're delighted to those of you who are back on our campus and those here for the first time. Let me just tell you a little bit about Lipscomb. We have nearly 6,000 students, including our K-12 students at the academy and our university students. Foremost, as a university, we are determined to teach them knowledge and critical thinking. We are determined to prepare them for professions in the future. But I would say one thing that really distinguishes us is we are very committed to them understanding and being committed to civic leadership and community involvement. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do it through service learning, we do it through mission trips, we do it through the institutes, and through every class that our students are in. Let me just mention these briefly to you. Service learning is a form of classroom experience that's put together with a service experience so the students learn firsthand how to integrate their knowledge with their practice. We have over 92 courses, faculty members doing that this fall, which is outstanding. We also send our students on mission trips, being a Christian university. This past year, we had about 500 students travel to 25 countries for some 50-plus trips. One of my student friends was on a team of 12 women who went to Moldova. Moldova is in Eastern Europe. It's one of the poorest countries in that part of the country and has one of the highest rates of human trafficking. Now, as undergraduate students, they were a little frustrated that they couldn't make a greater impact, but I'm telling you, they were there in a powerful way in a couple of different orphanages, providing knowledge, trying to help the women to understand about human trafficking so that they could prepare them to make better decisions and have a better life. A profound impact on our students. And then we have the institutes at Lipscomb. These are structured around community topics to have influence in the community. We have Law, Justice, and Society, which is composed of about 80 undergraduate majors, conflict management, civic leadership, sustainability, spiritual formation, corporate responsibility. And it's the job of these institutes not just to offer academic programs, although there are excellent academic programs for each of those, but also to be in the community making an impact. So I know that some of you in this room know the topic of human trafficking firsthand through some experiences. I was introduced to the topic and to the stories of some of those who suffer from this modern form of slavery by reading, many of you will recognize this, Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Dunn. And if you haven't read that, it's a powerful read by a couple of journalists. So in a recent editorial, Kristof introduces us to a young 15-year-old. Her name is Grace Forrest. She had just visited an orphanage in Nepal a year or so ago and asked her father, a wealthy Australian, to accompany her. She wanted to go back and see some of her friends in this orphanage. When they returned, they discovered that her friends had been sold to brothels. This had a powerful impact on Grace and on her wealthy father. He subsequently cleaned out his businesses of human trafficking and is making a great contribution through what's a global slavery index. Very difficult to count and develop statistics for this area, but we do know that there's about 60,000 modern-day slaves in the U.S. and about 30 million worldwide. This is a very significant problem that we're addressing today. We know that about 2/3 of foster children, of which there are nearly 400,000 nationwide, never go to college, and very few graduate. Imagine your own kids between 18 and 21 and how critical those years are of them continuing to come back home, right? And get your advice and support. These are a critical period of time, and we have learned through different research that indeed if foster care is extended, that the recidivism and the jailing rate goes down significantly. And so we know that our own system for foster care is absolutely critical to approaching this problem. This editorial I recently read by Christoph, he ends it this way. He says, slavery looks very different now than it did in 1850. It was more obvious then. It's more subtle now. But he encourages us to attack it with the same ferocity that consumed Wilberforce. Remember the Englishman, the Quaker, the abolitionists, who back in the late 1700s made a huge difference in England. He's saying to us, let's not ignore this problem. Let's not look back years later and wish we had done more. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for making this an important topic. And we look forward to the result being some very concrete things that we can follow up on to impact human trafficking in our country and internationally. Welcome to Lipscomb.
Good morning. I'm Steve Joyner. I'm the director of the Institute for Conflict Management, and we are so thrilled that you're with us today. The Institute, as Nancy mentioned and described as the other institutes on campus, one of the main reasons we are here is to support the work of our community. And the Institute is designed to help people through difficult moments, manage complexity, and handle the challenges that we face right now as we try to make this a better world. I particularly want to thank the work of Phyllis, Hildreth, Beth Morrow. Is Beth in the room here? Beth's our assistant director. I believe she's out making things happen. Sherry. Those are all people within the Institute. You just heard my boss talk. I was teasing someone as the lone male in my circle. I have my own women's fund that I work with every day. So I appreciate the power and the influence that you have. And once again, the Institute welcomes you to Lipscomb and hope you have a wonderful day.
Well, good morning or afternoon almost as we get to it. My name is Tricia Carswell and I'm the current president of the Women's Fund and thrilled to be here representing our board of advisors and those in the community who care about this tremendous topic. Before I've framed a few remarks, will be very brief, but before I do, I hope all of you saw either electronically or, as in my case, in hard copy, the front page of today's Tennessean, not only talking about this topic and putting some numbers, some tangible numbers around the complexity of the problem, but also the Women's Fund. They call it the Women's Forum. That's all right, we'll take it. It's good press. But if you didn't get a chance to read your paper this morning, do. It's a wonderful article, and we're thrilled to have the timing of it today. Before I give some well-deserved notes of appreciation and attribution, I'd like to share just a few notes about the Women's Fund. Our fund is Middle Tennessee's only endowment solely dedicated to identifying and supporting the needs of women and girls. The Women's Fund was established within the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee in 1994 by its president, Ellen Lehman, and a committee of community leaders who wanted to invest in long-term solutions for transforming the lives of women and girls in our community. Through our endowment within the Community Foundation, the interest generated from the fund is given annually to provide support to programs dedicated to helping women and girls in our community. As the principle grows, so does our ability to meet crucial needs and affect social change. To date, the Women's Fund has given 260 grants totaling slightly over $884,000 in 3 primary areas: achievement of economic self-sufficiency for women, prevention of violence and crime against women and girls, and the promotion of health and physical well-being and talent for women and girls. Our fund is growing and our impact is increasing so that the agencies we support can become Middle Tennessee's leading resource for identifying and supporting the needs of women and girls. To this end, our board members have committed to hosting an educational forum on issues which our grants support. In 2012, we hosted our first educational forum on the disturbing and growing trend of human sex trafficking of minors in Tennessee. Today, we will dive deeper and broader into the same topic, expanding the discussion by delving into the societal reasons that young women become trafficked and what we can do to help prevent this terrible cycle. Note that the word "do" is a verb. Events like today's only happen with leadership. I'd like to thank our Women's Fund board members, co-chairs Phyllis Hildreth and Esty Harris. If you could both raise your hands. And their wonderful committee members, Mandy Young, Elizabeth Dennis, and Beth Courtney, if they're here, if they could just raise their hands. They worked so hard on this event. And obviously, I can't say enough about Lipscomb University. A team of nearly 10 staff and administrators with a special shout out from me at this point, they've already been mentioned, to Beth Morrow and Sherry Gunther, all lent their talents to today's logistics and functionality. Phyllis Hildreth, a member of our board and the academic director of Lipscomb's Institute for Conflict Management, paved the way for making today happen. And Dr. Durham and Dr. Joyner, I especially thank, I think they may have left, they probably had engagements. I especially thank them both for being with us today and for their earlier remarks. We're gratified to be a proud partner with Lipscomb. We're also extremely grateful to Verizon. Their support came just when we needed it most and helped ensure the financial viability of today. And special thanks to you, board member Mandy Young, for making that happen. Last and certainly not least, my thanks to Randy Spivey, academic director of Lipscomb University's Institute for Law, Justice, and Society, who will serve as today's moderator and introduce our distinguished panel. Randy has devoted countless hours to the success of today's event. But before I hand the podium to Randy, let me leave you with this one overarching thought. What we're about to discuss, ponder, and even debate is vitally important. But everyone involved in this endeavor realizes that while we take on this critical educational effort today, tonight in Middle Tennessee, closer to home, here in Nashville, not far from this institution, young women will once again find themselves in the devastating situation of most often drug-induced sexual trafficking that attempts to steal their very souls, if not their lives. I am personally humbled and sobered to even discuss the topic and its solutions. Our board members are grateful to and in awe of those professionals who each and every day seek to identify and protect these young women. So now we'll hear from them. Randy, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carswell, and thank you to the Women's Fund. So often when we approach a subject like this that is so difficult, we will begin with awareness and we will end with awareness without taking the final step to figure out exactly what we can do. We are very lucky today to have a panel of 6 individuals who have shaken off that false facade of awareness and gone to work doing, putting their hands to the plow to work very hard. And I'd like to introduce them to you now, moving from your left to your right. First, we have Margie Quinn, the Assistant Special Agent in charge at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Ms. Quinn has worked for the TBI for 14 years, oversees the Amber Alert and Missing Children's Clearinghouse, along with the Gang Intelligence Unit. Ms. Quinn was named the 2000 TBI Agent of the Year for the TBI Drug Investigation Division and received the 1999 and 2000 FBI Recognition Award for outstanding contribution in drug enforcement. Next to Agent Quinn is Rachel Freeman, who is Vice President of Clinical Services at the Sexual Assault Center. Ms. Freeman directs and supervises all clinical services provided to clients. She also serves as the Secretary of the Davidson County Community Advisory Board, for the Department of Children's Services, and is a member of the Adolescent Sex Offender Task Force. Next to Ms. Freeman is Derry Smith, the founder and executive director of End Slavery Tennessee. At End Slavery Tennessee, Ms. Smith provides human trafficking victims and their advocates a single point of contact for in-house services and service providers that restore survivors to wholeness. Previously, Ms. Smith launched an anti-human trafficking initiative among 1,200 workers for a worldwide organization and worked with populations especially vulnerable to human trafficking, including in inner-city Nashville. Next to Ms. Smith is Ryan Dalton, who is the co-founder of Rescue Forensics, which archives data from classified advertisement websites, specializing in commercial sex ads for law enforcement agencies to use in anti-trafficking investigations. He has previously served as the Director of Anti-Trafficking Operations for Operation Broken Silence, where he researched and lobbied for 19 laws and amendments to improve Tennessee's anti-trafficking legal framework. Representative Mark White of District 83 in Shelby County is a member of the House of Representatives of Tennessee, where he has co-sponsored numerous anti-trafficking bills, including bills that that create a Class D felony offense of promoting travel for prostitution and terminate parental rights or guardian rights if a parent or guardian has been convicted of trafficking. And at the end is Dorinda Carter. Ms. Carter is the Communications Director for the Department of Corrections and a current graduate student at the Nelson and Sue Andrews Institute for Civic Leadership here on campus. Her graduate project involves establishing an extension of Magdalen House program within the Department of Corrections. Now that we are finally done with introductions, we can begin having this conversation. And Special Agent Quinn, I would like to start with you. If you could tell us right now where we are in Tennessee combating human trafficking, in particular sex trafficking, and what are our vulnerabilities?
I can tell you that today we are. Today we're a lot better off today than we were this time 3 years ago. That's, I think, the really great news for Tennessee. We are continuing to raise awareness. I think that's our biggest challenge right now is to raise awareness for the state, both the civilian population as well as first responder, or what we call first reporters. We've done a tremendous amount of work, obviously, with the legislature to pass great laws that will help us in make sure that kids are protected legally. There's a legal framework in place to protect children. I'll let Ryan later tell you the success of that. From the TBI standpoint, we are seeing a definite rise in the number of cases reported, which tells us that the training that we're doing is working. The TBI alone has trained more than 7,500 first reporters in the state in the last 2 years. And so as we train and raise awareness, the numbers will increase. When we released our report to the legislature in May of 2011, TBI and Vanderbilt Center for Community Studies, I think we were all enormously surprised, shocked really, at the numbers of cases reported, the counties that were affected by the crime of human trafficking. I think we all thought that this happened in foreign countries or even to foreign nationals residing within our country. But the fact that it happens to United States citizens in our own backyard, that was really really the shocking thing, I think, that we learned through the report. So I think what we've got to do is once we've gotten our head around it, then we need to look at the factors that, or either the environmental or other extraneous factors within these counties that are reporting high numbers of minor human sex trafficking. What's going on in these counties? What is making the population in Tennessee and probably in every other state particularly vulnerable to this crime of trafficking? And I think that's what we're probably going to explore here today, and that should drive the conversation forward, I think, for the next couple of years.
What do you see as those factors as we begin to get our mind around this problem in Tennessee? What do you see as those factors that are contributing to the vulnerability in places we didn't expect vulnerability?
Well, the TBI is about to release a follow-up report to its 2011 quantitative report. And in that report, we're going to profile and look specifically at the 21 counties across the state that reported the highest numbers of minor human sex trafficking. And just right off the bat, I can tell you that 17 of those 21 counties are rural counties. And so, thinking that this is a foreign national problem, we also probably thought that this was an urban problem. The headline of our report in 2011 is not that there's trafficking in Memphis. No offense to our folks from Memphis. The headline of the report is that trafficking occurs in our rural counties. Now, it may look different, it may present differently. There are other factors that contribute to this type of crime in rural areas. Poverty is certainly a huge factor. Unresolved sexual trauma in a child's past. Repeated exposure to domestic violence or drug addiction or drug abuse within the home. I mean, there are a number of factors that are contributing at a child's very early age where intervention is probably necessary. It should be mandatory because once that child is exposed to a laundry list of things, and you'd be surprised at the number of children in our state who are exposed to these unfortunate factors, that puts them on the unfortunate road or a trajectory into a crime like human trafficking, into crimes like domestic violence and rape and sexual assault. So I think we probably need to turn our focus into areas where we intervene or identify children or vulnerable populations at younger ages. Once they get to 15, 16, 17, it becomes very difficult to intervene, rescue, restore once they've had, a decade of abuse at the hands of family or guardians or friends and then strangers. It's a daunting task once you get to that point.
I want to remind everyone, in your packets, there are some cards that you can use to write questions or comments that you may have for the panelists, and we will get to those questions at the end. If you would write them and then pass them to the middle aisle, we'll take them up and for our question and answer time at the end. Agent Quinn, you led us perfectly in to Ms. Freeman, and I appreciate that. It makes my job a lot easier. And Ms. Freeman, so many of the victims of trafficking in Tennessee will come to that eventually out of a history of sexual abuse and sexual assault. Can you talk about this early intervention that Agent Quinn mentions and how important that is? And then knowing that we've got that trafficking is present in our more rural areas that perhaps don't have access to the sexual assault center that we have here in Nashville, how can we begin to bridge that gap?
Great questions. As Ms. Quinn said, early intervention is a must. One of the things we've realized, many of our community partners and the Sexual Assault Center have had several discussions to see that one of the root problems of human trafficking is childhood sexual abuse and many other forms of childhood trauma. And one of the ways we can work to prevent trafficking is to catch childhood sexual abuse when it first happens at an early age. And that means people like us having these types of conversations and being open to talking about sexual abuse and how to prevent it and how to what signs and symptoms to look for, how to address it if you hear a disclosure, if you see a child acting out in a way that seems abnormal. So early intervention is an absolute must. It's something that we have to focus on from the time our children are itty-bitty until they are teenagers. We need to have these conversations very quickly and early as parents, as professionals, as caregivers. All of the caregiving system for a child needs to be on the same page and have the ability to have these conversations. And then those children who are more vulnerable will have the support people in place to hopefully protect them better and to address it. Many of the youth who end up being trafficked or experience this crime do so because they aren't or end up being victimized because they aren't able to find the support they need. So if we can look for the signs, see the red flags, talk openly about sexual abuse, have those conversations, then we're more likely to be able to intervene and prevent a long-term problem from happening. And then, as Mr. Spivey said, the Sexual Assault Center is here in Nashville, but we're not everywhere throughout the community, and in the rural communities, it's much harder to find access to good care. The child advocacy centers have places throughout the state, and they can address child sexual abuse and physical abuse. So there are places throughout our state that are available. Our center is one that you can contact, and we can connect you to the right place. So even though there aren't centers in every rural community, we do have the ability across the state to work with community partners and connect survivors to the right place.
Good, and I want to stick with both of you just for a second and ask you both this question. What are the unique needs that a victim of trafficking has from a law enforcement perspective, but also from a treatment perspective that you've seen as you've worked with these victims?
I can take from a law enforcement standpoint, they first need a safe place. They need a safe place to go, to be. It's difficult to get a victim of trafficking to sit still and not run on you. Some do want the help as soon as you come in contact with them, but many do not, and it may take repeated contact with that victim before they will accept your help or assistance. But I think that safe place is the first step. I agree with Rachel that our CACs are an underutilized resource in our state. The forensic interviewers that have now all been specially trained to interview human trafficking victims. I think that's an enormous resource that we probably are not utilizing to its fullest extent. And from a law enforcement standpoint, we believe, I think firmly now, that a victim who has been through treatment and counseling and been offered services from a law enforcement standpoint is going to be a better witness for you, is going to help you further your case towards conviction. If we cannot achieve conviction on the cases that we indict or we bring forward, then we're not effective. We're not effective at our part of this issue, which is to put the trafficker behind bars so that additional victims are not victimized. So, but back to your earlier question, I think that safe place is probably one of the first things we need to address.
I agree completely with Margie. We can't provide treatment until a survivor is first safe. So the safety and stability are the first things we have to address for trafficking victims. Once they have that safety and stability, we love to jump in and provide treatment as soon as possible. The sooner the better. But that takes, this is cliche, but it takes a village to do it. Trafficking survivors experience trauma that impacts every area of their life.
They need everything.
They do.
They need everything.
And just one of us cannot do it, which is why it's great to have a panel and why it's great to have multiple community resources. And those resources working together is what's most important. Because again, the survivor of trafficking is impacted. That trauma impacts every aspect of their life. They have difficulty feeling safe in any area of their life. So they need additional supports. They need additional safety plans, safety precautions. They need, sometimes it's immediate needs like housing, like resources, clothing. Their life has been completely disrupted, so they often have to start again. And I know Derry's going to speak in a little bit, but in slavery is able to do a lot of those, meet a lot of those immediate needs, and then we can come in after that and provide the treatment. What we've experienced from the treatment perspective with youth who've been trafficked and with adults is if we have the support of the other agencies, then the healing is possible. The therapeutic healing is possible because the immediate needs, the safety, the stabilization, those things are being met, so we can provide counseling. And when a survivor has that ongoing counseling support, then they can start talking about it. After their immediate needs are met, they can start working on the deep-rooted trauma. It may be childhood sexual abuse that led to the trafficking. So we can work on all of those things. We have an excellent relationship with Magdalene House at the Sexual Assault Center. And one of the things we've experienced with the women who have been trafficked at Magdalene House is if we work together, if Magdalene and SAC and then all of the other agencies that support those women work together, that's where those women experience healing. And that's the same goes for the youth who experience trafficking. If we all work together as a community to help them heal, then they will heal when they're ready. But we also have to be committed to a long-term treatment. We can't expect that this is going to be fast or short-term. It's not a couple of months. It may often be several years. And we have to be okay with that and committed to that and let the survivor know that it may be a long-term journey, but we're with them on that journey. So those are some of the unique treatment needs. But the treatment doesn't look that much different for a trafficking survivor as it does for somebody who's experienced sexual assault. It may be more complex and it may be more long-term, or those survivors may have more immediate needs, but the treatment that we provide doesn't change.
Ms. Smith, one of the things I love about In Slavery, Tennessee is this very large, holistic vision that you have for addressing problems of human trafficking. Can you talk to us a little about the steps that we can take here in Tennessee that are preventative in nature? What are the things we can do to stop the victims that are at risk now from our youth from becoming at risk in Tennessee?
Well, a lot of times when we talk about prevention, especially in the nonprofit world, we're talking about information dissemination, and that's very good. It's kind of like putting warning labels on cigarettes. It's an important part of deterring smoking, but it's not enough. And the one way I like to look at it, I think my two colleagues to the right have covered this pretty well, but is to look at meeting the needs of young people in some healthy way, because if we don't, then they are very vulnerable to the exploitation of a trafficker. So traffickers know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Probably all of you have encountered that somewhere along the line, and use it to their benefit. For example, if you have a runaway girl sitting on a park bench and a guy comes up and he starts a conversation, he's all sympathetic about her problems, he might then say, you know, I have a sandwich here. Would you like half of it? He's just met her basic need for food. Then he'll go on to, maybe he'll start walking away and he'll go, well, it's really not safe for you out here. Why don't you just come home with me tonight and we'll figure this all out tomorrow? That next layer in the pyramid, safety. And then he moves on to become her daddy and has this perverted sense of family that she's longing for. And so it goes on. And so if you have young people who, maybe this is really bad, but maybe it's the best they've ever known, and some of their very real needs are being met just in some very distorted ways. So the more we move in to meet the needs of these young people when they, we do prevention groups, for example, in group homes and other places with girls, and they'll disclose all kinds of issues. They've been abused as children, sexually and physically. They've been raped. They've experienced trauma. If we can come in at that stage and get them the therapy they need, get them the safe place, get them the place of community after school where they know they can go and they have a sense of belonging. When we start finding healthy ways to meet those needs, they're a lot less vulnerable when a trafficker comes along to meet them in less healthy ways.
One of the things I'm continually struck by in these conversations is the need for good communication and fluid conversation between nonprofit organizations, government, and nationally there is a climate of, let's call it tension, if you will, and lack of cooperation. Can you tell me how this is working in Tennessee right now, what we are doing well in communicating between agencies and where we could be better?
You know, even though we have a long way to go, we actually are being looked at as a model across the country by other states. And I think there are several reasons for that. One are the laws. Maybe some of you saw the Shared Hope release that said we are #1 in the country for the best laws related to human trafficking, a fact that is largely thanks to Ryan and to Margie. But also because we have a great collaborative team here. We don't have a lot of big egos. We have a lot of people who have their special niches, who really want what's best for our victims. So, you know, we've kind of alluded to this, but our agency works with local, state, and federal law enforcement. Good communication, good people all around. There are, you know, Magdalene, Carrie is just a tremendous support and mentor. We have the Sexual Assault Center to turn to. I think all of us, the child advocacy centers, have the forensic exams in place. DCS, DHS, there are just so many players, each of whom has an important niche. And we're learning to talk together. And one thing I'm kind of excited about, I don't know if you want me to mention this yet, but a lot of the stakeholders got together last year to develop a statewide plan, a protocol for providing services to human trafficking survivors. I think we came up with a pretty good plan, and it's what we need. We need communication, we need collaboration. We're not going to solve this problem working in silos.
As you work with victims, especially those in need of a tremendous amount of aftercare, Ms. Smith, what are the aspects of that you find most difficult to provide, the most challenging aspects of the aftercare?
Oh, goodness, I could go on all day about this one. You know, when we encounter somebody, they have pervasive trust issues. Understandably, everybody they should have been able to trust has betrayed that trust. But we're finding good ways to meet that. We have actually an intervention specialist on staff who's a Magdalene grad. She's been there, so she can develop connections. But we have to be so individualized. We have to have therapeutic aftercare. This isn't like normal clinical kind of case management. It's very individualistic, very holistic, very relationship-oriented, so that when somebody comes to us, they don't have a support system. They don't know how to navigate all the needs that they have and the services that they're needed. So if we don't make an appointment at the Sexual Assault Center and take them to those therapy sessions, it's probably not going to happen. And that's true for almost every service that's provided. If I just pick out of the air one big challenge that I'd like to say, because there are community leaders here who might be able to come up with creative solutions, it would be that immediate housing for the adults particularly. When they come out, we've got tremendous expenses dashing around to try to find places, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for weeks, until we can figure out the next step, whether that's drug rehab or it's residential treatment or it's independent living. It takes time. And so I've often thought if the hotels or the churches that have guest apartments or whatever it is got on some kind of a roster and, you know, we called on them once a year, it wouldn't be too much on anybody. Some kind of creative solution like that would be wonderful. So.
There's this high-touch component that keeps coming up over and over again. I think about a third of the trafficking victims that are discovered in that are discovered by community people who just happen to be seeing it. And that kind of awareness and involvement seems to be a very important part of this. Mr. Dalton, as we move to you and talk about specifically folks that are applying an expertise they have to this problem, tell us a little bit about rescue forensics and what it does.
Sure. So I started this project back when I worked for a nonprofit out of Memphis. And one of the recurring themes we saw for the survivors that came, to need access to shelter, to all the needs that Derry and Rachel have talked about, we saw that a common theme was that all of these women were exploited on the internet. And not only that, but law enforcement were having a really hard time obtaining the evidence that they need to lock these guys up, to indict them, to make sure it doesn't happen again, or to find victims that are re-trafficked, that have been moved to a different part of the country. And we realized that there's a tremendous opportunity for the tech sector to make a tangible impact on human trafficking. So we began collecting massive amounts of information that's publicly available, that's put on escort websites and websites that are specializing in internet-based prostitution, retrieving a lot of information that traffickers put up. So for instance, an advertisement on a website maybe like Craigslist that advertises the girl in an escort section or prostitution section often will be a minor that's being trafficked. This is a place where human trafficking has migrated in the last 5 to 8 years as the internet's become much more available. And every constructive use of technology that we use, traffickers will also use. And so we began collecting this information and supplying it to law enforcement. And not only that, we began to, we've created a lot of great analytics from this information. We can see movement of trafficking networks across the country, and we can see frequency of movement. We can see frequency of the amount of times a trafficker will advertise a victim on the internet. And this is a tremendous value for the investigator who otherwise wouldn't be able to find this information. And we license this out to law enforcement across the nation.
So part of what you do is both a investigation tool for an ongoing investigation, but it also provides an archive that can be that law enforcement can access to look back as well. Is that correct?
That's right. There's two components to it, and it depends on where the investigator is in the course of the investigation. If the investigator wants to begin a totally new investigation and look for human trafficking in the jurisdiction in which the investigator is operating, they can do that. But also the prosecution is very important. Ultimately, we want to see these guys locked up, and sometimes there are evidence gaps. Rescue Ops allows a prosecutor to retrieve this evidence that, maybe he saw that the victim that he's working with is 19 years old, but he knows that she was trafficked 2 years ago, and the only evidence is a Backpage ad that was put up 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when she was a minor. Well, if they can find that evidence, that automatically allows them to bring a much stronger human trafficking case, and so it speaks to both those components.
How receptive have law enforcement been so far to the use of this?
Sure, we have had a lot of success in our beta market. We've worked with law enforcement in Memphis over the last couple of years, supplied them with hundreds of these evidence artifacts that they've either used to indict, prosecute, or find victims. One particularly great instance I can think of was we spoke at a conference in Florida. I sat down with an investigator and showed him how this forensic works and allowed him to log in, and we put in Fort Lauderdale County as the search query, and it populated all of the analytics that I spoke to you about a second ago. And right there on the front page after that query populated, we could see a minor. Her picture came up. She was probably no older than 16, and he was able to begin an investigation immediately, called his supervisors and went to go track her down. Unfortunately, they didn't find her, but that kind of quick response and actionable intelligence speaks to the power of technology against human trafficking.
You've also been heavily involved in the drafting of legislation in Tennessee. Can you tell us what you think we've done well and the gaps we still have to fill at this point?
Sure. Like Margie said, we've come a long way in 3 years, and that's because of representatives like some that are here, state agencies and nonprofits, everyone working together. And we also talked about that power that comes with collaboration and partnership. And on a state level, there's no better example of that than everyone working on the legislative framework that Tennessee needs so desperately. One thing I think we've done particularly well that sets us apart as a national leader is that we amended our sex trafficking statute to include the word purchasing. So if someone purchases a person for a commercial sex act, this is a person that's a buyer, our sex trafficking statute covers that conduct, meaning that we are able to, under state law, call a buyer of a commercial sex act a trafficker, right? And this really makes sense when you think about it from a policy standpoint, because the crime doesn't happen without the demand. And so that all automatically ushers in these strong penalties that come with a trafficking conviction, Class A or Class B penalties. Another thing that I think that we have done particularly well is communication is a tremendous problem sometimes in anti-trafficking. We've created a task force that's about to launch in Tennessee that gets a lot of the state agencies, Department of Child Services, TBI, nonprofits, and really all the stakeholders in Tennessee together on a formal basis. It's codified under law that we have to meet twice a year to really figure out the best way to strategize to defeat this crime in our state. Not all states have those kind of provisions, and I think it really sets us apart.
Representative White, I know that one of the great concerns you have is about our children that are leaving foster care and what a vulnerable population that they are. Talk to us a little bit about what Tennessee is doing to address the vulnerability of that population and what it still has left to do.
Well, thank you, Randy. Appreciate it. And as I begin to address your question, let me recognize Representative Deborah Moody. She's up here also. Esty, did Senator Kelsey come in? He's not here yet. Regardless of what you may read or see on the news, and we have a great group of people over at the General Assembly. It's kind of like this room. There's 99 of us. We get the easy part. They bring us all the legislation and things, and then we get to then start pushing it through the General Assembly. And we do have a great group. The only times we get any pushback at all is if it starts getting a fiscal note and a lot of money attached to it. We have to balance our budget in Tennessee, and so if it's got a $5 million budget, we got to figure out either where to find that money or do something else. So that's things. What we're talking about in creating stability out of instability, and so many. When the average age that a child can be trafficked is 13 in this state as well as across the nation, and 60% of the estimated 150 to 250,000 young people who run away that are trafficked each year come out of foster care. And so what can we do as a state? We all care. A lot of times people ask me, well, what's the answer to this? There's so much dysfunction. And a lot of times I say, short of another flood, I don't know. Because we as each individual, each people, we have to take on the responsibility and change it. We were created as a people, and the foundation and stability comes in the home. And when the home is not there, children suffer. I used to have a poster on my wall a long time ago that says a child is someone who comes into your life for a brief moment and then disappears into an adult. So we've got a little bit of time that they can have a life as a child. So to answer your question, right, Randy, one thing that we've done through the Department of Children's Services, which works very, very hard, and the governor and the administration is, actually in 2010, they passed this legislation, and then last year in 2012, we made it permanent with the funding, is that when a child reaches 18 in foster care, that, the money just doesn't stop. And I can imagine what would happen to me if my parents would say, okay, you're 18, and you're out the door. I was living at home many, many years past that, and I won't tell you how many. They had to kick me out, actually. But, and so if you have to move on to what happens to an 18-year-old where the funding, so what this legislation, House Bill 2337, I think was the latest one that we passed, and so that puts funding permanently to where if a child in foster care so opts, they have to take advantage of this. And this is a challenge because foster care is not the best answer either. Department of Children's Services would admit this. It's got a lot of problems in there. So a lot of times they just want to get out of the system and move on. So what this bill will do was allow the money to stay with them through their 21. If they want to continue through high school, if they want to go on to college, helps them with independent living. Even if they fill their oats and they leave at 18 and go out, and pretty soon they find themselves in trouble as the world soon picks you up. They say it's within, if you're a runaway, you're pretty much picked up within the first 48 hours. Isn't that one in three in the first 48 hours? So if you can keep a child that's going through foster care, this is under the state has this responsibility, then into their age 21, then maybe they have a fighting chance, which we all. So this is what the state has done, is to provide funding. It's called transitional living, independent care through the age of 21 for our foster care children in the state of Tennessee.
One of the things that we're seeing nationwide with state legislatures is difficulty in balancing the laws that are punitive in nature, the punishment laws, raising the penalties for trafficking, with the laws that provide some sort of rehabilitation, aftercare, and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about the difficulty the legislature faces in the tough on crimes type laws and the laws that can provide some sort of rehabilitation to victims?
Right. The part that I can talk about, the tough on crimes, and a lot more on this panel would have far more experience than I. But one reason is we all say we need to be tough on crime. And one reason it's so hard is because the average is like, what, $72 a day to keep a person in jail. And we're into the hundreds of millions of dollars as a state to, and so if you say, okay, if this person commits this particular act, well, we don't, 2 years is not long enough, let's go 10 years. Well, you're going to have a fiscal note to keep a person in prison for another 8 years. So therefore, that comes back on your piece of legislation. And and if you don't have the money, it's hard to get the bill passed. So that's the biggest struggle. Not that we don't want to, is that you've got to find the money to do everything you pass. The state budget in Tennessee is about $30 billion, and we do balance it, unlike the federal government right now. So I just had to throw that in there.
I hope all of you are aware that I've done this panel a tremendous disservice in how quickly I've run through them and how little I've allowed them to talk. So I want you to know that I'm trying to save time for your questions. So again, there are cards in your packets, and if you could begin passing those to the middle as we move to Ms. Carter, we'll get to those in just a minute. Ms. Carter, we're looking for creative ways to begin to address this problem systemically. Can you talk about the very unique project that you are working on right now?
Of course, and I want to say to Representative, we just came from our budget hearing, the Department of Correction this morning, and of the $30 billion that you mentioned, $1 billion is directed toward corrections specifically. We have 110,000 offenders under our supervision. So what we're looking to do is to reinvest that money into programs that will keep people from returning to prison. So my project, for those of you who don't know, Magdalene is a 2-year residential program for women in the Nashville area who've survived lives of abuse, addiction, prostitution, and trafficking. And so I've been a volunteer board member with Carrie Rayson at Magdalene for the past 6 years, and as a student at Lipscomb, and also working for the Department of Correction. So my project is to implement a Magdalene program inside the Tennessee Prison for Women, where the women will complete a year of the Magdalene program and then hopefully win parole into the Magdalene program in the community, where a house and a job and therapy and all of those things will be waiting for them. Because in Tennessee, the recidivism rate is 46% right now. Magdalene has a success rate of 72%. So two of the biggest issues that keep people from, or that cause people to reoffend, are not having a house or a job waiting for them. And so this program, we will begin small with 6 women who are at the Tennessee Prison for Women right now. They'll live together in community, and they'll receive, we're collaborating with Rachel, they'll receive group and individual therapy to address the childhood sexual abuse issues from the Rape and Sexual Abuse Center. They'll also take classes on prostitution and receive, for the first time in Tennessee, and we believe the first in the nation, a program inside a correctional institution that specifically addresses issues of childhood sexual abuse, prostitution, and trafficking.
When we were talking earlier this week, I told you I wouldn't say this, but then you said I could, so I'm going to. You mentioned that the stated mission of the Department of Corrections is to run safe prisons, and I thought that was a terrible mission statement, and thought that if that is your goal, that is what you will do. This project of yours has a very unique opportunity to go beyond just keeping the prisons safe and to begin to break some of the cycles of abuse and recidivism that we see going. Can you talk a little bit about the unique partnership between a nonprofit, a state agency, and an academic institution, and the benefits of that triangle of partnership?
The timing has been perfect because the Tennessee Department of Correction and Governor Haslam, I believe, have recognized that you can no longer build your way out of this problem. You have to look at alternatives to reduce the population. The state doesn't want us to have to spend $1 billion on locking people up, and the way we've been doing it hasn't been working because the recidivism rate's 46%. So you lock them up and throw away the key, and then you let them out, and then they come right back. So this partnership and what the Department of Correction is now seeing is there have to be alternatives in the community. You have to address the core issues that are causing people to offend in the first place and offer those programs. But the Department of Correction can't do it alone. It needs partners like Magdalene. It needs the Rape and Sexual Abuse Center. And I think as Rachel and Margie said, it needs the entire community working together to heal women specifically that I'm talking about, because we have 1,570 women in our prisons in Tennessee today. That's not counting the population in the jails. At the Tennessee Prison for Women, there are 800 women out in West Nashville right now who are suffering, and the women in this particular program range in age from 25 to 45. Some of them have long sentences, but many of them are going to be coming home in the next year or two. Their crimes range from theft, burglary, meth manufacturing, and murder. And we want them to come home in better shape than they were when they first came to us in prison.
What is your greatest hope for this project?
I have many, but my main hope is that the women heal no matter where they are. If they're not paroled from prison, that they heal from the scars of the childhood sexual abuse and the prostitution and addiction. But then second, that they would win parole and they would go home and they'd be paroled into Magdalene, and that they don't reoffend.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to some questions. I've been flipping through these, and I've got there's some really great questions out there. A lot of them involve Magdalene House, and so I may not focus on them quite as much because they are specifically about Magdalene House. Do we have a Magdalene representative here that I can point folks to? And I might ask you to come up to the front towards the end as people have specific questions, because I don't want to, put you on mic when I haven't talked to you yet, and that would just be rude. But let's start with this one. Human trafficking and sexual abuse include functions of power and control for victims and survivors, which are not blind to gender or sexuality. How do men figure into the equations as victims and survivors as well as perpetrators?
When we say women, we talk about women and children as victims of human sex trafficking. It's certainly a generalization, but it's not a gross generalization. There are estimates out there nationally that suggest that there are about 10% of the trafficking victims are men or are young boys. We have recovered boys in the state who are trafficking victims, who are trafficked into Tennessee through our robust interstate system from other states. There's certainly a high demand for boys as well as young girls, but we find it even more difficult to quantify the victimization of boys than even girls. And somebody else on the panel may be able to speak to that, Derry, but I mean, there certainly are young boys being victimized.
Yeah. Well, I will say that that's certainly true, although we've only worked with one boy so far, and I think that probably has more to do with the difficulty, that boys are less likely to come forward. Law enforcement maybe isn't focusing quite as much there. I'm not sure what all the reasons are. And to the other aspect of the question, we actually just held a training, our first training last week for men who are volunteers with us to address not only the trafficking of boys, but also work to avoid the tide of the next generation of Johns and traffickers. So those men are going to be going out and working with middle and high school age boys, small groups, kind of like what we're doing with our girls, to just, it's a great interactive program, comes out of Chicago, that just helps the boys really analyze what the messages are they're being fed by our culture, about what it means to be a real man, about the messages they get about the objectification of women, in hopes of turning the tide there.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. I also think we've historically viewed sexual abuse and trafficking as a women's problem, and we view women as the victims and males as the perpetrators. And we know that there are many, many, many males who are also the victims, and women can be perpetrators as well. At the Sexual Assault Center, about 80% of our clients are women, and we work with about 600 people a year, so the other 20% are male. So males are sexually abused, males do experience trafficking. We just historically talk about it as a women's problem. And I think Derry and Margie both touched on this, but if we can get the message out about healthy relationships and what a healthy relationship looks like for men, women, and regardless of sexuality, then I think that helps decrease the stigma and stereotypes around disclosing sexual abuse and trafficking.
Are there programs, I'm
So
sorry.
they'll just say there are also an alarmingly increasingly number of women who are being prosecuted in state and federal courts as traffickers. Many of the women who are abused at young ages are first abused by their mothers. Mothers allow the abuse to occur. They facilitate the abuse, and you can imagine what that does to a young girl's psyche going forward in life. But there's an alarming, I think, progression from child abuse sex victim to trafficking victim to recruiter to trafficker. And some of the women that are being sent to the federal penitentiary in our state are particularly violent and brutal traffickers. And that's unfortunately, I think, the progression. If intervention doesn't occur, if restoration doesn't occur, then these women will end up in federal penitentiaries as the trafficker.
Are there programs in Tennessee schools right now?
No.
That was a very short answer.
What kind of programs?
Programs that begin to raise this kind of awareness that we've been talking about, that begin to talk about healthy relationships at least at a relatively young age.
We do have a program at the Sexual Assault Center that is in kindergarten through 6th grade that talks
in metro schools.
In metro schools, well, in counties throughout Middle Tennessee, that talks about safety. It's a primary prevention program that addresses healthy relationships, safe and unsafe people, qualities of safe and unsafe people, that starts that basic education. It's not a child's responsibility to stop this. It's not, and never should be, a child's responsibility to prevent sexual abuse, but we do want to give them skills and tools that they can use to attempt to protect themselves, but the greater conversation still needs to be with the adults and how to prevent and stop and respond if it does happen.
A piece of legislation that we're going to introduce this coming session is called Erin Marin's Law. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. She's been on national TV. You know, we talk a lot about stranger danger, but 92% of sexual abuse of children occurs in their own home, uncles, cousins, boyfriends, all the 9 yards. And what we were asked the schools to do a better job of teaching that, to say you've got to say something. I work with children in Central America, and a lot of abuse there, and as we all know, it happens 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and then when this one young lady, she's now 24, that I've been working with for 12 years and having tremendous psychological problems. And so they need to talk about it, and so we want to encourage our schools to do a better job. So we're going to introduce that come January.
I'll add to that and just say that there's a there's a bill that we're looking to introduce in the spring as well that includes the Department of Education as a specifically enumerated agency that will be potentially required to have some human trafficking training. State personnel and all across the state, not just agencies here in this room, but agencies that you may be surprised to think would be a first responder or have some involvement with the population that are vulnerable to human trafficking. They need to be trained, and there's great opportunity for that. Tennessee is a just fertile environment for that kind of training based on how many people here in our state agencies that now understand this issue and can take it back to other people within the agency.
Approximately how much, I'm sorry, don't want to interrupt, go ahead. Oh, no one, oh well. Approximately how much state funding is dedicated to human trafficking in Tennessee?
I'm not sure.
It's hard to know. I mean, we spoke about fiscal notes earlier, and there's money that's allocated to training. There's money that's been allocated to increased incarceration costs. So we've had some heightened penalties introduced in the last few years. Those are really enhanced incarceration costs for some of our statutes are promoting prostitution, patronizing prostitution. When we beefed up our penalties, that's where most of the money has been directed into by the General Assembly directly for this cause, and then also some of Margie's training that she's done. We have an extremely receptive General Assembly to this issue, and so they've been really great about making sure that things need to be funded that do. Exact numbers, though, I'm not sure either.
Looking at prevention, how can we create places that are safe and healthy for youth to have their basic needs met and to create community in non-urban areas, such as rural or suburban areas?
That is a good question, and it is more challenging. I mean, I will say that our agency has a focus on Middle Tennessee, so we'll travel to any county within Middle Tennessee. We do have resource lists of community partners who have, everything from after-school programs to making sure kids have food, that kind of thing. But it's a good, valid point that a lot of the services are centered around Davidson County.
I think continued education is part of primary prevention and providing safe places. If we can continue to disseminate the education and then take it a step further to all of the adults who have contact with youth and children, not just teachers and not just counselors, but those people who have the ability to respond and pick up on the cues or the red flags of sexual abuse or trafficking. If we provide that and get that out into the rural areas and help equip adults to respond and then be prepared to offer safety, that can be one thing. But it's a challenge.
Let me add a yes to that. Training really can be prevention, because we find that suddenly we have a nurse who thinks, why do I have a 12-year-old with severe pelvic inflammation? And they're aware of this issue, then suddenly they might call the hotline. They might get some help. If you have a teacher who has a truant student in the second grade, maybe some red flags are going to go off and they're going to get a call, and these issues are going to be stemmed a lot earlier in the continuum.
What do we need to do to rehabilitate the criminals or the perpetrators of this, as well as the victims, to break that cycle as well?
I think that depends on whether you're talking about the demand side of that problem or the trafficker. Now, of course, the buyer can also be the trafficker. So I'll just use the word sort of pimp and buyer. Depends on what their specific motivation is. So if you're talking about just a straight up trafficker, a pimp, you got to look at what led them into committing that crime to begin with. Are they a gang member? Were they a drug dealer? We see a lot of movement from drug dealing over to trafficking, because this is a reusable, resellable commodity. And prior to last year, the risk was so low on this crime, and the reward was so high. Much less risk than selling drugs or selling guns. And again, it's a reusable, resellable commodity, not illegal in and of itself to possess, unlike a kilo of cocaine. So I think the laws, I mean, it really can't be overstated, the laws that we have put in place to combat trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children are extremely important when it comes to this type of issue legally for us. It really is going to depend on, when you're talking about the demand side, you know, we've got just under 20,000 registered sex offenders in the state of Tennessee. We increase about 150 a month. They are not coming off at that rate. On any given day, there are as many as 74% on who are registered for an offense against a minor. So demand has got to be dealt with. We've got to talk about and have a dialogue about demand, and that is not necessarily a popular conversation, because demand could be your dad or your brother or your neighbor or you know, a police officer or a clergyman. I mean, demand is across the board. It hits everybody, and that's a difficult subject for us, I think, as a society to deal with. And so this increasing demand for young children, young girls, young boys to have sex with, at some point has to be stemmed. And I don't know whether you do that through preventative efforts, through education, through tough laws and sentencing, or if it's just a conglomeration, if it's a holistic approach to deal with demand. The Knox County District Attorney's Office told us this summer that they were prosecuting 3 times the number of child sex abuse cases this year than they did the same time last year. So that sort of increase in the number of child sex abuse cases identified and prosecuted is a huge indicator to us that there's something going on the demand side of this issue. And we're going to have to address that and take it up, I think, a little more seriously than we have in years past.
We're quickly running out of time, so I want to ask one last question, but I want you all to answer it. And we will we'll start with Ms. Carter at the end and work our way this way. What can an ordinary person do to make a difference in human trafficking and human sex trafficking in Tennessee?
First, the ordinary person here today can go downstairs and purchase some of the products that the Magdalene women are selling from Thistle Farms, and that money goes directly to the women to help with their needs, and it'll also benefit the women who are in prison who are in this situation. But speaking about it, we only began to do that in recent years. I mean, my family and a lot of families I know kept the secret hidden, and now that it's come out of the closet, so to speak, I think that means a lot to women and children who are experiencing this. So conversation is great.
Yeah, my answer to that, my question is, we can legislate, we can spend $1 billion, and we still have so many issues. Of course, my passion in with children, I have 2 grandsons, 9 and 11 now, growing up, and how do you train these as young men to grow up to be the proper kind of young man? In my work with students in Central America and this country, I'm always thinking of ways, how can we change things without legislating? That's the secret, and that's where each of us one-on-one comes in. That's the only way to do it. I put together a book one time called May I Call You Dad? Why Fathers Are Needed in the Home, which is the whole problem. I know we could cure 98% of these issues if we would have men who would stay in their home when they have a child and raise that child to adulthood to provide all the things that a child needs, education, unconditional love, all those things. And so that's what we've got to get back to. And that's where you don't legislate that. You just one-on-one, when you're raising your children and your grandsons and your granddaughters, that's where it comes. So that's my passion.
I'm a big believer in that anyone can be an abolitionist. It doesn't really matter what your skill is. You could be a graphic designer, and I'm sure Derry would love to have a graphic designer. The needs are endless. I mean, they really are. I worked in a nonprofit for some years, and anything from, like an attorney could sit on a board, or help with civil remedies for a victim, or, a student could apply whatever they're learning if it's marketing in the nonprofit world. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to look at this problem and needs for the agencies and the people that are working against it. There's really an endless amount of ways to be involved. The second thing I would say is, particularly to the men in the room, I know there's a lot of women here, which is awesome, but the men need to challenge their friends in the culture of being comfortable with commercial sex. Whether it's you got buddies that go to a strip club, or you got buddies that are okay with purchasing prostitution or viewing pornography, that speaks to the heart of this issue, and it's not challenged enough or hardly at all. And as that culture becomes challenged and demand subsides, the crime will abate. So those are the two of the big things that come to mind for me. The final one I would add is in the springtime, when some of these bills come forward to really make just a tangible impact on this problem, call your legislators and call your senators, your representatives, and tell them how important this is to you. And like I said earlier, we have an extremely responsive General Assembly, and they'll listen. And that's where enduring social change can happen.
I would add tangentially first to Ryan's number 2 that the language we use can be important, and that's a simple change to make. If we're talking about a journalist or a friend who's talking about a child prostitute, that puts the onus on the child. So you start saying, no, a prostituted child. Those are small things, but they impact the way that we think. And the next thing I would say is just a ditto to Ryan. I think it's important to be who you are, to use your skills and your experience and your sphere of influence, and use those in a way that nobody else can. So our volunteer manager is over there, Karen Karpinski, and she specializes in helping people find their niche. So if you're a professional and you're comfortable doing public speaking, maybe you're going to go and we'll train you to talk to people in your profession about the things specifically to look for in identifying a victim. Maybe you have a club and you want to sit around and make food kits and some of the emergency kits that we give to the new girls, women, boys, men as they come out. And everything in between. There are just literally dozens of ways you can come and make, phone calls. I couldn't begin to list them all, but Karen can.
Ms. Freeman.
So I think there's a lot we can do as individuals. As an ordinary person, I think there's a lot we can walk out of here and do within our own spheres, within our own homes, places we work. Some of those are as simple as start having conversations with your children at an early age, your children, your grandchildren, and the other children you have contact with. Talk about private parts. What are private body parts? What are the appropriate names for private body parts? Start those conversations early and young so that we can change the dynamics of our over-sexualized culture. And when children do encounter unhealthy situations, unhealthy sexual situations, they know the terminology to use and they know who to talk to if they have a problem. So start those conversations at home and start them early. The other thing is that, again, I think I've said it several times every time I've talked, but education, primary prevention is a huge piece of this. And the Sexual Assault Center is partnering with the Tennessee Chapter of Child Advocacy Centers and other agencies, Magdalene, Our Kids, several other agencies throughout our community to provide a program called Stewards of Children. And it is a program that teaches adults practical tips to prevent sexual abuse. And we know sexual abuse is often the root of trafficking. So having these conversations, come see me, Bonnie Beneke, or one of these other wonderful women in the room, and we can connect you with hosting a Stewards of Children party at your home, at your church, or anywhere else. But basically talk about it, keep talking about it, and keep doing things like this.
Agent Quinn.
I think that I want to speak to the partnerships that have been formed both in the Middle Tennessee area and across the state. I think the value of the partnerships between the nonprofits, between the private sector and the public sector have been so important and so informative. When we all collaborate together, I think we can do some really special things. I do want to say thank you so much to the Women's Fund for projecting this topic and for participating with the TBI. We have been kind of joined at the hip for the last couple of years. And many may not know this, but the Women's Funds came to me about 2 years ago and said, "What can we do?" And they were about ready to stand on tables and wave their arms. And so what they decided to do was coalesce for the first time in their history, Chattanooga, Nashville, and Memphis, and advertise and promote the human trafficking hotline in the state of Tennessee as a philanthropic endeavor. They announced that publicity campaign in March, and as a result, the numbers into the hotline went up 100%. And since they've done that, we've recovered 4 juvenile trafficking victims in the state just since May. So I think the partnerships, that have arisen as a result of this horrific crime are special, and I think going forward, we should continue to look at ways in which we can all work together as a community, as a society, as nonprofits, as activists, as legislators, as government stakeholders, as private institutions. The ways in which we can work together are going to solve this problem for us.
I want to echo the thanks to the Women's Fund for this event, and thank you all for coming. I believe Ms. Carswell has a couple of announcements, but let's take a moment to thank our panel for spending the day with us.
As we close, just a few notes to the file. Some of them were already done. The first thing I wanted to do was to thank this tremendous panel. I learned so much yet again, and I took, yes. I saw Women's Fund board members taking notes. I was taking notes, and I was taking notes with the use of verbs. Again, I love verbs because they result in action. And so we'll be, I know, as a not-for-profit entity and as a fund within the Community Foundation, looking at what we can do as individual board members and as a fund to continue our support. On the front end, when I was thanking our sponsors, Verizon and, of course, Lipscomb, I saved at that moment because as I glanced across the room, I didn't see Rita Mitchell, but I saw her as I was taking those notes. And talk about verbs. Rita is a board member of the Women's Fund, and she convened a group of executives at First Tennessee, where she is in the executive realm, together, and allowed us, the Women's Fund, to have the opportunity to sit down with them and educate them on trafficking. And the response was a significant support of not only the Women's Fund, but today. And so, Rita, I thank you, and we thank First Tennessee. And lastly, I want you to know that the vendor booths that you saw when you arrived on the first floor are still there. And when we were talking about some of you having specific questions for Magdalene, I know that you'll be thrilled to know that they are one of the booths. And if you don't find them here, you'll find them there. And so not only will you be able to purchase amazing products, but you can get some of those questions answered that time just didn't enable today. Thank you all for allowing us to convene this conversation today. And if you'd like to know more about the Women's Fund, we're an inclusive organization, and we would love to demonstrate to you exactly how you can be part of the fund. Thanks for today.